the full year growth was 6.1%, so it's still below the target of 6.5 to 7.5. Looking back, could we have hit 6.5, at least 6.5, if the government spent more throughout the year? You mentioned that during the fourth quarter there was definitely an increase, but the previous quarters there was. And what does the government plan to ramp up spending in the? What does the government plan to do this year to further ramp up spending?
Okay, as you have noticed, the performance of the government sector in the national income improved quite dramatically in the fourth quarter. That's partly because of the glitches that we have encountered in the previous quarters, were resolved. Not completely. They are still. Many are still work in progress. But some of those unspent resources in the previous 3 quarters were obligated in the last quarter, and the impact of that and the economy would be felt and should be felt in the first 1/2 of the year. So you would expect to see quite a robust performance of the government sector in the first 2 quarters of this year, because that captures part of what the resources that were obligated last year.
I'm Cecil from Bloomberg. So you talk about accelerating economic growth from the 6.9, so 6.9% in the fourth quarter. So does that mean that from first quarter this year, growth will likely be at least 7%? And we're on track to meet the full year.
For this year and next, we are targeting 7 to 8%. We believe, based on our analysis of the time trends and the information available, that our economy has moved into a long-term growth path, and 7% is quite sustainable and achievable. About the long-term prospects of the economy, I'm giving a lecture at 2 o'clock at the Hotel Intercon on the state of the Philippine economy today. So you want to know more about, dig deeper into what characterizes this economy and where we are heading to, I invite you to attend that forum.
Sir, Raul Dancel, Straits Times Editor. You mentioned the impact of oil prices, that oil importing countries will gain from this trend. Specifically, how will the Philippines, what impact will this trend have on the Philippine economy for the coming year?
Importing oil, not oil importing country, and many of our industries are quite energy dependent. Our manufacturing is very energy dependent. The tourism that we are developing is also some segments of that will also be very oil dependent. Services sector, transport in particular, very oil dependent. So this would reduce the cost of production and cost of mobility, cost of power in general, and so that would also help tame inflation and therefore affects your personal consumption part of the national income account. So its impact on the economy would be would cover wide ranges of sectors.
Sir, Kyra Hilario from Business Journal. Just wanted to ask regarding the growth of manufacturing. Do you think that the manufacturing sector or the industry sector, for that matter, will be able to outpace the services sector in terms of share to GDP? And 5G. Do you have any estimates?
No, that does not happen. In the history of nations, as you become increasingly, as you approach the advanced country status, it's the services sector that dominates the economy. That's the kind of economic structure that we see now in the US, Japan, and many advanced economies. But in our case, for many developing countries, low-income countries, an initial rise of the share of industry, particularly manufacturing, will boost employment prospects and will improve the quality of employment. But eventually, as the economy matures, the service sector dominates. Our economy is a bit strange in that sense. And we are only one of the very few countries that have this kind of economic structure where we move from initially agriculture to largely services. All other countries that have successfully reduced poverty, created quality jobs, move from initially agriculture, then industry, manufacturing, then eventually services. I think it was a big mistake for us to have ignored that transition, because in the process, quality jobs were not generated.
Any more questions?
Morning, Bong Bongolan from Philippine Commercial Capital. Which kindly directed to, sorry, back to the slide, breakdown of by expenditure shares. Not that one, that one. Listen, sir, just a computational question. If the whole year capital formation growth was 1.1, but the components grew rather strongly, at least the ones reported. Fixed capital formation 8.6, and then construction 10, which put it down.
What was not included there is the change in inventory, which has become a big part of the growth this year. What has happened is that it's a negative. There was a huge withdrawal of the inventory.
Yes, sir, but it's not necessarily mean negative performance.
No, it's not.
There's more demand that took out the
It's a cycle.
Thank you, sir.
Next question, please.
So would election spending have a strong impact on economic growth this year? And what's the rule of thumb? By how much does the economy grow prior to an election year?
There did a study some time ago about the impact of election spending, the election period and the growth of the economy during that period. And they did see some connection, that there is some effect. But again, this time it might be a bit different because the president has announced that he knew that he's not running for. The dynamics could be quite different this time. But it's hard to say how the various actors come to play. But in practically all countries, that happens. Where you have elections, because that generates a lot of spending, especially for services.
Sir, you mentioned increase in your statement earlier. Is the government concerned about the possible implication on investor confidence of the recent the death of the PNP staff officers?
Obviously, we should all be concerned, not just government. Every citizen, every Filipino should be concerned because it affects each one of us, no matter where we live. Whether we live or we come from Mindanao, you're from the north of Luzon, it affects us all, directly and indirectly. And the impact on the economy of conflict has been quite substantial. We have several studies have quantified the impact of conflict on the economy and human development. For example, we see in the armed provinces the lowest levels of human development achievements, particularly in the area of health and education. Studies show that that performance is connected to the armed conflict. And of course, we all know the potentials of Mindanao. Its potential as an economic power base. So it's a foregone opportunity. It's a missed opportunity if we don't resolve or we fail to resolve this problem as soon as time possible.
Year was 2013 was the slowest during that year because of Yolanda. Can we say it could also attribute to the faster Q4 growth last year because we didn't have any strong typhoons or calamities like Yolanda? Agriculture particularly was.
That 2013, it slowed a bit, not at the fourth quarter, but as I reported in the first half of last year, during the first quarter performance of the economy last year, that much of the impact of the Yolanda came in. Impact of the economy came in the succeeding quarters, 2014. Because remember, Yolanda came in mid-November, November 8th.
Sir, I wonder what is your take on this? Perhaps there is somehow a delay between the country's economic growth with some of the inclusive growth indicators like poverty and employment. I wonder, the previous years when we were growing like 7%, those poverty and employment indicators weren't really that good. But now that we're slowing down, somehow there were improvements in these inclusive growth indicators. The second question, sir, how do we compare actual GDP growth with the previous targets of the last 4 years? Perhaps this year we really fell from the target, but in the previous years, how do we compare actual GDP growth? Thank you.
You are preempting my lecture this afternoon. I will try to provide an explanation and that link and why, what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years as opposed to other periods in our past, particularly after 1970s. But to give you some flavor of what I will be sharing this afternoon. Is that what we are seeing in the last 5 years has never been seen in the last 40 years. The 5-year average growth of 6.3%. The last time we have had such growth was in mid-1970s, about 40 years ago. that's the kind of of appreciation that should be impressed on us. That this is not something that you can or something that something that we can all be proud of. Of course, there are challenges, as you rightly pointed out, and the inclusiveness of the growth. But again, the sharing about directly this afternoon, that for all the countries that have effectively reduced poverty, these countries have grown consistently for 20 to 30 years. And also in the process, build up under human capital, improve access to opportunities for the poor. And so we can ask ourselves, are we moving in those directions where access to opportunities in the areas of health, in the area of education, are beginning to be felt? It's beginning to be felt. Interestingly, as we saw and I shared earlier, the labor force, the labor employment data, in the last round of the labor force survey is quite encouraging because it shows that the October 2014 data compared to the October 2013 data showed an additional net employment of almost 1 million jobs, which is quite considerable, and that has contributed to the decline in the unemployment rate. Now, so the numbers appear to be coming in supportive of this strategy. But as I also mentioned, it's a long way to go before we can effectively make all this growth shared broadly. There's so much more to do, and there's no shortcut to it. We have to do, as I appeared earlier, right? We have to do deepened reforms. We have to do many more, not in the next 2 years, not in the next 5 years, but perhaps in the next 10 or 20 years. But that's how we can effectively get out of these problems, as what our neighbors have done.
Next question.
Please, in front.
Fernando, but not competitiveness. Can you name one particular factor that pulled down the annual growth figure and made the government miss its target? One factor that was responsible for the government missing the annual growth target.
Of GDP. Well, there are many things. We have reported, everybody knows about the earlier sluggishness of government spending, for example. But as I said, we have managed to do some catching up in the fourth quarter. Not everything is lost because, as I said also earlier, those resources, to the extent that they would be captured by the data in 2014, would reflect an even higher growth for government. The slowing down of the global economy because we are all integrated with of course, the interest rates have begun to increase. There's a number of those, but of course, if you look closely at the various components of the GDP, you find some sectors growing much faster than others, and you find some sectors actually outperforming their performance in the previous quarter. So at this point, just to be honest with you, I mean, I haven't really gone down into pinpointing exactly the contribution of each of these different factors. No? One can do that if you have to go deeper into the data.
Perhaps one last question from the audience before we wrap up.
Hello, Karen, sir, from Buenos. In terms of government spending, because we've seen the impact of the weak underspending in the third quarter that was pretty evident, and we saw some recovery this year.
You said, sir, you said a while ago.
Sir, but you said a while ago that you're trying to fix it, and we've seen some improvement, but it's still not 100%, because you said there were still some glitches. So would you say that the worst is over, because economists, even multilateral institutions are forecasting that growth this year will probably be at 6.5%, and much of the activity this year will still depend on the ability of the government to spend its budget. So would you say that the worst is over, so in the next couple of quarters we'll just see continuous acceleration in public expenditures?
At least for the problems that we encountered, I would think that the worst is over. We have learned, we identified the nature of the problem, and we are doing something about it. But development is quite dynamic. As we move along, there will be new problems, new issues, and we just have to be quite adaptive and be smart enough to be able and get ourselves prepared to address those problems. There will be surprises, and we can anticipate every problem that come in. But that's the nature of development. That there are surprises, and I think that the reason some are able to do better than others, that they are able to prepare for those surprises. And of course, one area of preparation there is, at least for the long term, is to improve our institutions, the quality of our governance. And we can start with the educational system, get our people more better informed, sharing of data, so that for example, government is pushing for open data, so that people can readily analyze, pick the data, analyze what's wrong with the government performance and the economic performance, and feed that back to the system. That way we can respond to the problems faster.